Well, it is good to be with you all this morning. We are in 1 Peter, making our way through 1 Peter, this series. I love just straight exegetical Bible teaching. What does the word say? What does it mean to us? Now today, I've got a little bit of a disclaimer and an incredible promise that's maybe bigger than life, all right? So it's going to sound a bit sensationalized, but I believe this is true. Today, as we get ready to study this text, it is going to be hard because, like last week, we're still in the section of text that deals with submission. And Americans are terrible at submission. We're terrible at it. We're terrible at submitting. We're terrible at honor. We're terrible at this. But this text that we're about to read is going to unlock something incredibly powerful, and I believe it could transform your life if you get it. I really believe it could transform your life if you get this. Have you ever noticed that a good friend of yours can tell you something almost difficult, like candidly hard to receive, and if it's coming from a good friend, it can make you mad, but you take it all right? Have you ever noticed that? Like if a good friend calls you out, you're doing something in life, maybe you were younger, dating somebody you shouldn't, or said something dumb, or you're wearing something you shouldn't wear, or that looks off or doesn't match. I got dressed this morning while my wife was still asleep, so I'm still not entirely certain I'm okay. But a good friend, man, can call you out. They can walk up and say, hey, listen, this is a dumb idea. You shouldn't be doing this. And even if it's hard to take in the moment, you're kind of okay with it. And then have you ever noticed, like you can be at work with somebody you don't like, and all they have to do is roll their eyes, and all day long, you're furious. You ever notice that? I've got a couple of examples. A number of years ago, I was working in a church. I'm actually a little embarrassed to share this. I was working in a church, and one of the guys on my staff, not my staff, but on staff with me, he worked in a different department. I didn't like him. That's true. Even as a pastor, you can have people, I know you shouldn't, should be holy all the time, but it's not true. Like, us pastors have bad days too. And this dude just drove me nuts. I don't know if it was like personality conflict. I'm not sure what the issue was, but I didn't like him. And I was up on my rotation to speak, and it was in the main services. It was at a huge mega church. So I had my rotation. I got up and I spoke that Sunday, and I was done, and we were back, and we were kind of going over the message, what worked, what didn't. And one of my friends, a good friend of mine, was like, hey, Mike, just to let you know, I know you're a youth pastor and all, but you said the word dude like 42 times. And when he made that statement, I thought, okay, you know what, that's true, no big deal, I need to work on that. Like, I received the correction, it wasn't that big of a deal. And then this other guy, all he did in the room when we were doing that, all he did was have his arms like this and roll his eyes. And I found myself all day thinking about how he doesn't belong here and doesn't fit our team and we need to have a better, isn't that interesting? Like my friend calls me out, and this guy I don't like, all he does is do something as minimal as roll his eyes, and I'm just sitting in that frustration all day. When I was working at a church a couple of years ago, the senior pastor had us all come in on a Saturday to help with a large project. I say all of us, a handful of us on staff. He walked in and said, I need your help, I need your help, I need your help. Come here, Saturday morning, we got to work. We got out of bed, came into the church, no big deal, got ready to work. And as I was out there working, I was talking with another friend of mine who was on staff. And so, now you got to imagine this, the boss walks in and says, I need extra work out of you. And in my mind, I saw it as him going, I really trust you with this project. But as I was talking with my buddy, he saw it from the perspective of he is out to make my life miserable. So here we are, same situation, same request from our boss, sitting outside on a Saturday working on this project. There's a handful of us doing it. And as he's talking about how terrible and miserable and awful and how mistreated he is and how I can't believe that our boss, the senior pastor, would ask us something, this is my day off and I can't. As he's going on and on and on about this, I thought in my mind, how interesting that I saw the extra work as a compliment. He trusted us with it, and he saw it as punishment. I read a book a while back called Critical Conversations. And I'm actually still finishing it up a little bit. It's one of those books where I dove into it really hard, and then you slowed way down as it's getting into all the stories. And it talked about how we have a tendency to tell ourselves a little story when events happen. So when something happens to you that you like or don't like, or somebody says something to you, you have a tendency, without even really thinking about it, to tell yourself a little story in your mind. What's the reason behind this? And I love this. I want to share this with you. If the story you believe is that this was done to hurt you, if the story you believe is that this was done to hurt you, you're going to always interject this little illustration and think about it from this negative perspective. Critical Conversations, I love this. The author identifies 3 negative stories most people instantaneously tell themselves when something happens to them that they don't like from a person they don't trust. Are you ready for this? So when something happens to you from a person that you don't like and that you don't trust, you're going to assume one of these little stories is happening. 1, I am the victim. You're going to see it as I'm the victim. Poor me. Life is terrible. This is really tough. I don't like it. You're going to see the other story you're going to tell yourself from somebody you don't trust or you don't like is I'm innocent. I had no choice but to respond the way I did. The book Critical Conversation says there's a third one, which is the other person is evil. They're out to get me. This happens, the author goes on to say, so fast in our minds, we don't rationally think through them. Okay, so now this is where it gets difficult because everything that we observe is true. So here I am. Okay, we got to go back to my job. I'm sitting outside. Our boss has given us extra work. My perspective on it happened to be, now I liked my boss, I got along with him for the most part, so I saw it as a compliment. He had a huge project and he was trusting us with it. This other guy saw it as punishment. He did this to make him miserable. So those little stories that we told ourselves, the facts that we had were all the same. I was there in the meeting when the boss walked in and said, hey, here's extra work. I listened to the same words, same conversation, same information. And though we saw the facts the same, the picture that we put in our minds was not at all the same. And it's because of the little extra stories that we tell ourselves. I believe that that is one of the places in your heart and mind where the enemy does the most damage. Where you have real, true facts in front of you. And instead of telling a healthy story of those true facts, you almost make like a caricature of them. In fact, I got a caricature in my office. I got this caricature in my office. Now, I want you to look at this for just a second. Okay, now notice. Big nose, though I don't have my glasses on today, I do wear glasses. Beard, ears, dark hair. Like all the facts about me are correct. But the picture isn't quite right. Do you see it? Now, for some of you, you're going, no, that's just about right on. Like, I honestly, when you're up there on stage, that's exactly what I see right there. That's fine. Make fun of me all you want. I can take it. Right? No, but this is what we do, okay? So in our minds, we will have all the facts right. Boss walks into the office. Boss asks us to do extra stuff. But even though the facts are right, you see it from a twisted perspective. And it's in those little stories, man, that make or break your spirit. I mean, do you hear what I'm saying? This is huge. Because if you go into your work, and as you walk in the doors, in your mind, you're thinking, my boss is out to get me, everything's terrible, the people are awful, this is really hard. And then you play all those stories in your mind of how people are evil and you're the victim, all those little stories. If you own those stories, you could have the facts right, own those stories, and fall apart emotionally. And the next person walks in the room, and all the facts are exactly the same. But if the little story they tell themselves is different, it changes everything. Do you see it? History teaches that most people respond to real or perceived threats in one of 2 ways. Okay, so if you see real or perceived threats, history teaches that you're going to respond in one of 2 ways. You're either going to want to make them suffer or you're going to run away, fight or flight. are the primary things you do. Now, fight for you in your office may just be bad-mouthing them. So at your work, at your school, even in your own home with parents that make you do things you don't like, or a spouse that drives you nuts, fight may not actually be punching. Fight might be going in and sitting down in somebody's office and going, "You won't believe what my boss did." Fight might be taking if your wife's driving you nuts, fight might be getting in the car with one of your kids, and the whole way you're driving to get ice cream, you're talking about, you won't believe what your mom did. And the author goes on to say that almost always what we're doing is we are working to create an environment where we make the story that we told ourselves actually true. Do you see it? In all those little bad mouth, bad talk, grumpy, don't like, what we're actually doing is we're working to make our perspective, the little stories that we told ourselves, I'm the victim, my life is bad, whatever, those little stories we tell ourselves, you're working to create an environment by fight that proves that your little stories are true. They're true. Do you see this? This is really big. History teaches that most people respond to real or perceived threats in one of two ways. They make them suffer, or the other thing they do is they run away. Now, run away might be nothing more than just shutting down. Like you refuse to participate in meetings anymore, or you refuse to have a conversation with your spouse, or you refuse to engage. But it's in those little stories that you tell yourself that this happens. With this in mind, I want to go to the text this week because the Bible offers another solution that's tucked away in a seemingly threatening text. So we're going to read a section of the Bible now. You got to hear me clearly. We're going to read a section of the Bible that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. But what this section of the Bible does, if you're able to see it, what this section of the Bible does, it is going to give you the ability to create a new story as you engage a world that is threatening. A new story. A new way to view the situation that you're in. Let's begin. 1 Peter 2, 18 through 21. Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing when, mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if you do good and suffer for it, you endure. This is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. All right, what is this about? Crossway Study Notes says it really well. It says, masters had extensive authority over slaves, and slaves were often mistreated by their masters. Still, Peter calls on slaves to be subject even to evil masters. Even to evil masters with all respect. Now we got to do a little original language work here to understand this historically and contextually. The word subject literally means obey. It means to obey or be obedient. Master is it's anyone that is in authority over you. Let that sink in. Obey with respect not only good and gentle people who are over you, but also those who are unjust. This is big. Think of how many people want to quit things because they are hard or uncomfortable. In fact, in verse 20, it defines what the hardship actually is. It is physical beatings. Case and Holdren in 2006 said this really well. These are some of our Wesleyan brothers' roots. In a commentary that they wrote, I love this, I'm going to read it to you. Peter does not allow for partial submission. One cannot choose to whom he or she will submit. One cannot choose. Nor can submission be based on the kind of conduct of a master. The admonition is to be submissive not only to the good and considerate masters, but also to those who are harsh. A considerate master is gentle and forbearing. Submission to this type of individual does not require much Christian ethic. However, in a very strong and contrast way, big contrast is possible, submission to a harsh, unreasonable, perverse, crooked, and dishonest individual requires real Christian faith and ethics. Regardless of which kind of master, the servant is admonished to be in submission to either one. Let that train of thought sink in for just a moment. It is unbelievably heavy and seems almost threatening in our social justice obsessed culture. But here is why he's doing this. Because the little story you're supposed to tell yourself is that you are here to make Jesus famous. Because the little story that you're supposed to tell yourself is you are here to make Jesus famous. The goal isn't easy life, it's making the ways and name of Jesus known. The intent of the text is so powerful. God allows his people to be in hard and even dark places that they might shine the light of his glory and grace. You shouldn't be, poor me, Eeyore mentality, like Winnie the Pooh. Everything's terrible, life is awful, everybody treats me wrong and bad. That's not how you're supposed to engage this. The little story you tell yourself is, God has called me to be light in this place. And like a special forces soldier who is called into the darkest and hardest parts of battle, he looks upon the people in his church and he honors you by saying you are worthy to love and show grace and mercy in these very hard places. But you see, it all hinges on the little story that you tell yourself in your hard place. What do you let bounce around in your mind when you're in those hard settings? He trusts you to this task. The word credit from the text is translated charis from the Greek. Contextually, it is synonymous with the word also meaning reward. He rewards you. You will be rewarded for shining in the light of Christ. I believe the enemy works in a very deceitful, dangerous way. A way that even good Christians who have all the right facts can even fall prey to. See, what the enemy does is he whispers in your ear all of the facts that are true. Your boss is hard. Your coworkers say jokes that, don't line up with Scripture. This work environment isn't ideal. Your teachers at school aren't very good. And he lays out all of these facts. And what the enemy does is he creates a caricature of everything that is true, but you're viewing it from a wrong perspective. And this text, the submission part in this text is not so that your boss wins. And the submission part in this text is not so that your spouse wins the argument. The submission part of this text is not so that your teacher in school can stand over you and do wrong things to you or knock you off on a grade because you believe in Christian ethics or faith or science or whatever, right? It's not that you submit because they hurt you. It's that you are in that environment that you might earn the right to proclaim the goodness and hope of Jesus Christ. And the little story you tell yourself is not, this is terrible, this is awful, this is horrible, and I need to fall apart, and I'm emotionally wrecked. The little story you tell yourself is, God has allowed me to be light in this setting. He sees me of being worthy of this very difficult task. But it's in the little story that you tell yourself. I want you to think for a moment about all the believers through history. I think the enemy has done such a good job in our Western culture of being self-obsessed and poor me and everything is terrible. What if we could line up all the believers through Christian history across the stage? Not even through history, even today. And we have most modern American Christians, and we go, one of them would raise their hand and go, you know what, I'm really suffering for my faith. because my environment, coworkers, they say bad jokes, and I think that if I might say something about Jesus, that maybe they might not like it, and it's really tough. And then I can imagine like our forefathers, people that have gone before us, even others that live in other parts of the world going, oh, I bet that's really tough for you. I had my head chopped off. And then over here in our modern world, we're like, my boss made me come in on a Saturday, and he's so mean. That wasn't in my job description. Help me, pray for me. And we got brothers over here going, yeah, I was burned alive on a stake. See, I think the enemy has us so wrapped into our little poor me worlds that we're not even able to be light anymore. And we're so wrapped into our little poor me little worlds, and it's all true. It's true that your boss isn't perfect. It's true that your workplace is hard. It's true that your spouse doesn't always respond right. It's true that it's not ideal and right. Those are all true things, but the perspective that you have of it is wrong. That's what this text is all about. Your perspective is wrong. God has allowed you to shine His light in that hard situation. Are you? Now, you need to hear me clearly. This is not an American sermon. Like, we're social justice obsessed. We want everything to be just right, equal rights, equal everything. Like, this kind of message stands in contrast to the American way. And it's difficult. Because what it's saying is, though we want to make the ways and nature of Jesus famous in this world, and we want biblical ethics and morality to become, law of the land in our workplace to be like that, that would be wonderful. That's not what we have. And it's saying the means to that end is not war, but it's living in those situations and being the love and light of Christ. It's earning the right to speak. Do you see it? But it all hinges on the little story that you tell yourself in your mind when something difficult happens. 1 Peter 1:22-25, we're almost done here. He committed no sin, neither was death. Now here's the really cool thing. He doesn't just leave us with this idea, he then shows us the example of how it's supposed to be done, right? So in the last week and this week, he lays out this very difficult teaching on submission. But then he doesn't leave us empty and hanging. He is now going to give us the model, the example of how it's supposed to be done. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. I was reading through a number of different commentaries. Frank Muller says this very well. The description of the innocent and patient suffering of Jesus is almost a literal quotation from the Septuagint version. The Septuagint is the Latin translation of the Old Testament. Of Isaiah 53:9, he committed his cause to God. Now listen, this is so good and so contrary to our modern way of viewing the world. He committed his cause to God, not, however, by invoking the vengeance of God on his enemies, but by praying for their conversion and pardon. Jesus is our example. He walks into a broken darkness. He walks into our broken darkness. He did this obediently and willingly. He bears the full weight of a sinful people and still weeps and prays for their conversion. He bears the full weight of the evil world, and he still prays for their conversion. Do you see it? He doesn't take up arms. He doesn't run away. It's not fight or flight. He doesn't take up arms, and he doesn't run away. He loves them. Do you see the third story? Do you see the third story that's developed in this text? Now listen, if I didn't teach exegetically through the Bible, if I was just like a topical pastor, I would have skipped the last 2 weeks. because these are hard and they're not very American. But what Jesus does is he offers a third story to be told. Not fight, not flight, but love. The third story that's told is love. He trusts that God, now notice this is really important because you can't do this if you don't trust that God will make all things right one day. He trusts that God will judge perfectly and continues his mission. Jesus does. So Jesus trusts that God will judge perfectly and continues his mission. This is our example. I'm going to invite Josh up. We're going to be done in just a few minutes. Your ability to submit. Okay, now you got to understand, when I say submit, I do not mean that you make the other person's views of the world or actions right. That's not what I mean by submit. Submit in this text does not mean that now your boss's evil actions are justified. That's not what this means. Submit does not mean that you make bad actions okay. That's not what submit means. Submit means that you allow yourself to be in that system so that you might be a missionary in it. Man. I can't tell you how many times I hear people pray or want me to pray for them that God would take them out of a dark place, like a job, work environment, whatever, and put them in a place that's really easy and light. It's funny. I mean, like, even when people come to work at the church, a number of years ago, I was hiring somebody, and they were like, I can't wait to work in a place that's all Christian. And I thought, believe me, we're not perfect either. But the intent of that heart, I love it. I love the intent of that heart, but what they are wanting is not what God has called us to yet. Now, in heaven, we get that. That longing in our heart is a God-given thing. We want things to be made right, and we want to be made new. But that being made right and being made new happens when this season is done. We are going to walk into glory and grace and be with God forever and eternity, and he will judge perfectly. But right now, Matthew 28, 18, 19, and 20, right now, God has called you to go and make disciples. So would he not then put you in places that need disciples to be made? Would he not then put you in those places? And I hear people pray things like, God, I want to be used by you. I want to do great things for your glory and grace. And Lord, I just can't stand my job. If you could put me in a place where and I'm thinking, whoa, hold on just a second. Do you not see this? He has given you the honor of being in a hard spot that you might be light, and you're praying out of it. It's like signing up for the military, becoming a special forces soldier, and in your first assignment, you're going, I was thinking the army was going to be about relaxing with my buddies and going to the movies. Dude, he has called you to this. Students, it is a gift that you get to be his light at your schools. I did youth ministry for a long time. I'm telling you, if you can see what's really happening in the meta picture, that greater story that's being told, you are missionaries. Don't walk into your school scared. Walk into them knowing that you get to be light. And if you were picked on for it, who cares? Because he's going to make everything right one day. You don't need to be afraid, and you don't need to fight. You need to love. Boldly love. If you are in a job right now that you hate it. Maybe the question ought to be, Lord, how can I be your love and light here because you have allowed me to be here? And the little story that you tell yourself is going to change everything. So when you drive home, let's create a couple scenarios, and then we're going to be done. When you drive home and your boss is driving you nuts, and he said, whatever, a joke that was vulgar, and he fired this person for no real cause, and he gave you extra work and it's not fair, whatever scenario you want to create, it's terrible. You hate it. And when you drive out and you're driving home, on your commute home, all that's going through your mind is the enemy is giving you real facts. He's saying, boy, your boss is mean. True. He's saying, boy, your boss didn't treat that person right. True. He's saying in your mind, boy, your boss, he's not for you, and I don't even think you should talk about your faith because you'll definitely, get picked on for it. I saw something. True, all true. And so the little story that you have in your mind playing over and over and over again is, poor me, this is terrible, life is hard, maybe I should fight against it, maybe I should run away from it and get another job, maybe I should talk bad about my boss, that's the fight part, right? Maybe I should do all these things. Instead, what you do is you do what Jesus did. He looks at the city and he weeps and prays for them. So you get in your car, you get there, you're driving home, and you get in there, and the enemy starts putting all this stuff in your mind, those little stories that you tell yourself, and you say, in the name of Jesus, I rebuke you, enemy, get out of my mind. And God, by your glory and your grace, I pray for the salvation of my boss, and let me be your love and light in their life. And this is an eternal battle, and God has called me to it, and it is an honor. It's an honor. Listen, God made me more like a coach than a cuddly person. I get it. And so, like a coach, I want to call you out. Stop being afraid. Stop talking bad. Stop making your workplace miserable. And you go in there and you tell a different story. You pray for those people. You call out to God on their behalf. You weep over them, and you be the love and light of Jesus Christ. You change the story from the enemy's version of it to Jesus' version of it. That's what submission means. That's what submission means. Do you understand that your whole life will change if you get this truth? Your whole life will change if you get this truth. Tell a different story.